Welcome back to Highside, Lowside. This is episode 6 of season 9. I'm Spurg. This is Zack. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing motorcycle terminology in an effort to make existing riders smarter and beginner riders more confident in the terms that we throw around. In addition to that, we're going to be talking about what is it like to ride an open face helmet and much more. But first, a word from our sponsor, Moto.
Engine oil can be intimidating. Should you buy Motul 5100, 300V, 7100, 710? Luckily, you can learn more about each and every type of Motul oil over at RevZilla.com/Motul. And if you're intimidated to change your own oil, for example, on that very same page, you'll probably see a how-to video with instructions on how to do it yourself. Whichever Motul oil you choose for your machine, remember that when you buy your next batch of engine oil from RevZilla.com, you can bet a few of those dollars go toward producing this Highside Lowside podcast. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL.
And while you're over there on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out the airbag save page. RevZilla is dedicated to making sure that you are informed about all the newest safety technology coming down the pike. And the newest, most protective safety technology that we've seen in recent years is the evolution of airbag technology. So to learn about the entire line of airbag products and which one might be right for you and your ride, check out RevZilla.com/airbags. Now, on with the show.
Alrighty, here we go, everybody. Off on yet another Highside, Lowside podcast adventure. Thanks for joining us. I would like to say right off the bat, Spurgeon, that this moto terminology topic that we're going to cover on today's pod is controversial among the Highside, Lowside team because we're worried that people are going to be like, I already know the terms. I don't need to talk about it. But we promise that you will get a laugh or a cry sometime today. We're going to do our best to make it entertaining.
We're not sure which one. We're not promising which one you're going to have. Zach used the word or.
I did.
So it is a laugh or a cry.
I did. First, though, not the news. A non-time sensitive topic that we would like to discuss with you. Now, our good friend Lance the Silver Fox Oliver published recently on Common Tread an article titled Dear Aspiring Rider. Please read this if you're asking for advice on social media. We figured this was a good thing to cover in the Moto Terminology podcast because it speaks to people that may know a little bit less about bikes.
Yeah. And with that being said, let's go ahead and start the timer. Lance was actually in the office here in Philadelphia today. I tried to get him to join us on the podcast.
A Silver Fox sighting.
We had lunch together and he was like, he's like, I got too much work to do. I can't come and just, sit around and talk with you and Zach all day. But we thought this was a good one, like Zach said, because, with motorcycle terminology, some of this will be kind of diving into some basics. Some will be a little more advanced. Some of it will be a fun conversation. But if you are just starting out in riding and you're not really sure where to start, you should reference this article because Lance does a good job of bringing together a variety of different links, everything from how to ride a motorcycle crash course. He links together the YouTube video channel for RevZilla, where we actually have a slew of different beginner pieces of content. He talks about how to get a motorcycle permit, motorcycle training opportunities, and then if you get to the second half of the article, there's a section specifically for women riders where he highlights womenridersnow.com, which is a site established years ago by Genevieve Schmidt, who we've talked about before on the podcast, and the different women that are supporting that website now as a resource for women riders out there.
Lance knows who his audience is. He knows that it's mostly the fairer gender that wants to know what he's up to. And he's speaking to those people. He gets it. He gets it. Jokes aside, this is a dynamite article by Lance because it sort of pokes fun at people, offering unsolicited opinions and advice for what exactly new riders should do. And I suppose in some ways we are no different, but we try to be self-aware. And that's something that Lance is very good at, especially in this article. And he does a lot of sort of linking to other pieces of content and other sources within this article. And if anyone has your best interest in mind as a new returning or aspiring rider, it's Lance Oliver. Would you say, Spurge?
Yeah, we understand the irony of, two people putting content out on the internet saying, don't trust everything you read or listen to on the internet. But I think Lance does a good job of explaining his point into why he's doing this. With Common Tread, which is our online blog on RevZilla.com, we've done a good job of trying to cultivate truly educational articles throughout the years. We try to put a little bit of I don't want to say scientific fact, but Lance is a journalism major. Zach Quartz is a journalism major. So we have some accredited staff to keep the rest of us hoodlums in line, basically.
And I like to think we have higher standards than many of the
average bear
folks out there. Yeah, than the average bear. There are certainly other websites, motorcycle specific websites, and other websites out there that have good staff members that have your best interest in mind, and they're objective, and the writing is clean and the advice is good. We're not the only ones. We're just asking you to be thoughtful, and Lance's article is a conduit for getting to that information.
There you go. With that note, the timer has gone off, and it is going to be us moving into discussing some terms to hopefully educate newer and existing riders alike on some terminology within motorcycling that they might not be aware of. And Zach, where did this idea come from for a podcast topic?
I'm so glad you asked. Well, it came from someone named Samantha. Ultimately, we got an email from Samantha, and it read like this. Hello, intrepid RevZilla podcast hosts. Love the podcast, even though I frequently have little or no idea what you are talking about, as you will see. Samantha goes on to ask questions such as, what are clip-ons? What is a slipper clutch? What does it mean to have a 280-degree crank, or any other temperature for that matter? And these, we thought, were pretty good questions, right? What the heck is a 360-degree crank or 180-degree crank or whatever? And we realized that there's a lot of sort of it goes beyond lingo. It's terminology. It's a sort of like foundational knowledge that's good to have to understand what people are talking about in the world of two wheels. And we thought, let's try to make a whole episode of this and talk about some stuff that people might not understand.
I think Zach and I, and this is probably a little bit of the how the sauce is made. But Zach and I, as we're working with producer Chase on the podcast, are regularly cognizant of like trying to stop, slow down, and make sure that like if we mention an obscure motorcycle, we explain what it is, or we put the picture up on screen. If you're
and you're particularly good at that, I think, Spurge. I'd like to call that out. Tip of my cap to you. Yeah.
Thank you. But I do think that there are times where, whether it is a English language barrier, because we do have a lot of people outside of native English speaking listeners.
We're a global podcast. We're very famous all over the world, I assume.
Exactly. Last I checked, I think Belgium is blowing up right now. So, but then also just as some of these terms are adapted to motorcycling, they mean something different. So I think, Samantha, you really struck a chord with Zach and I. Mm-hmm. We actually solicited terms from the audience.
We did.
So thank you to everyone out there that actually sent in additional terms. Producer Chase has narrowed down some terms for us to pick. Zach and I are not yet familiar. We have a fishbowl. Producer Chase gave me a literal... This is my Inky helmet, which has fish on it. And my terms are in my fishbowl over here. Zach has some terms, but let's start with Samantha.
Yeah.
And some of the terms that Samantha
two of them
talked
anyway.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say, I thought I was actually really caught off guard with the 280-degree crank one, because I always think of, when we're talking about degrees, it's a mathematical term or it's a temperature, right? And I guess technically both of those are mathematical terms. But it's either a temperature or it is a unit of measure for angles. And in this particular case, we're not talking about 280 degrees as in like how hot the engine is. It's 280 degrees from a crank standpoint, which means the degrees in which an angle will turn. I'm doing a horrible job already describing this. Zach, help me out.
Well, a crankshaft inside a motorcycle engine spins around, and those revolutions or revs that you see on your tachometer are measured in 360-degree increments, right? If you look at the engine,
a circle.
It's a circle, right? Yeah, okay. So, and the way that the crankshaft is set up on multi-cylinder engines, the way the crankshaft is set up, so that the connecting rods, all the pieces inside the engine, we're not going to get into too many details here, are sort of like balanced and even, are all broken down on the 360-degree scale. I would just like to pause and say, if you're interested in this topic, please go to YouTube and type in how does 270 degree crank work? How does 360 degree, 180 degree, all stuff like that, because you'll find videos that are much more, they're sort of like easier to digest. If our post-production team is on top of it, they'll be putting some graphics on screen right now to help you. The point is, crank pin offset, inside an engine has a lot to do with how the engine sounds and how it feels to ride. So that's why motorcyclists make such a big deal about a parallel twin with a 180 degree crank, which means the pistons go up and down opposite each other. One goes up when one goes down. That's like your Kawasaki Ninja 500, Ninja 650, that kind of thing. And other parallel twins have adopted the 270 degree crank pin offset, which gives the engine a little bit more of a sort of like a lopey V twin, 90 degree V twin kind of sound.
I'm gonna pause you for 1 second.
Okay, please.
Already we have launched into a topic where we've thrown out crankshaft, connecting rods, like we're talking a lot about, we're throwing out additional terms that you probably might not be familiar with if you're not familiar with 280 degree cranks. So I'm gonna pause Zachary and myself for a second. Say connecting rod, long rod, like just take a broom handle that's made of metal, and then there's other additional broom handles that come off of that go up and down inside an engine. If you want to see this, I think one of the best videos that is out there, and I was checking to make sure Ari didn't have a shop manual episode on this, but the one that comes to mind is Fort9 did a video called The Pros and Cons of Motorcycle Engine Type, and he's got some great drawings of how this works. And I think the important thing to note is that when we're talking about degrees in an engine, most likely we're talking about a unit of angle measure. How's that?
Yes, that simplifies it to the nth degree. I would say that it is only fair to mention sometimes when you're talking about engine degrees, you are talking about the temperature of the coolant or the temperature of the oil.
Correct.
But please do not look at your dashboard or screen or display or whatever, and when the engine says 212 degrees or 195 degrees or whatever, and be like, oh, I guess my crank pin offset is changing as the engine warms up. That's not a great point. Same thing.
Yeah. If you're running a engine or a motorcycle that does have a thermostat on your dash, that is for the temperature of the engine. You want to make sure that your engine doesn't overheat. And that is something different.
Mm-hmm. So
we're making it that much easier already. So we're taking a confusing topic and we're making it that much worse for all of you.
That's a slapdash discussion of what a 270 degree crank is or 180 degree crank is or whatever. But you will find many more resources like the one Spurg mentioned, discussing this and showing how it works if you look for it. I'd like to pivot quickly to Samantha's question about a slipper clutch. Spurg, because you do slip the clutch as you ride, like as you leave a stop sign, for example, on a motorcycle.
God, stop making this more confusing for people.
Well,
what is a slipper clutch?
Does that just mean it slips? Like is a slipper clutch a broken clutch because it slips?
I'm asking you, is that what it means?
No, a slipper clutch refers to a clutch that is designed to slip a little bit on deceleration, not acceleration. So this depends. There are many different ways that slipper clutches are designed, but the most common one is basically a little set of ramps that when the motorcycle is decelerating, the clutch plates are spread apart and therefore they slip a little bit so that the rear wheel does not hop and chatter should you downshift too quickly.
So if you are riding a motorcycle that doesn't have a slipper clutch and you were to just roll off the throttle, the momentum of the motorcycle, the rear wheel, when you downshift a gear, can cause the rear wheel to not lock up, but like
chatter and hop. Some manufacturers even call it an anti-hop clutch.
Yes,
and that sort of refers to the rear wheel. You trying to do research in real time?
No. I was trying to find, again, I'm confused. Like some of what I want to recommend for Ari is left over from like motorcyclist days. So like he has like the motorcycle slipper clutch, how they work. And I was checking to see if there was a TSM episode about that.
Okay. TSM is another thing we'll throw out occasionally. That's short for The Shop Manual, which is our friend Ari Henning's YouTube show on the RevZilla YouTube channel. Anyway, I think the takeaway here, to simplify it as much as possible, Spurg, is, as you did with the crankshaft discussion, a slipper clutch is a piece of technology that theoretically makes the motorcycle a little bit more advanced and easier to ride. There are lots of different styles. There's even something called a recluse clutch for off-road riding, which helps the motorcycle from stalling when you're going slow. And so that gets pretty complicated. The point is it's a little sort of added feature in a clutch that is supposed to help with deceleration, specifically in high performance riding scenarios.
So you can check out the motorcycle slipper clutch, how they work, from Ari Henning's previous career at Motorcyclist Magazine. And then just the final one, Clip-Ons, or is that one that's in our helmet?
No, I think that's in our little basket. So let's do that one later.
Okay.
Here's something else I'd like to ask you, Spurg. Do you remember, do you have a slipper clutch story? Do you have a time that you used a slipper clutch, or a slipper clutch saved your hide, for example?
I would say that I have been impressed with how slipper clutches have become, it used to be that a slipper clutch was on like a high end model. And I remember the first time that I rode, I believe it was the Ninja 400, and I was out on a track day, and you can really just kind of jam it down a few gears and it will not, it will not chatter on you. Now you do hit a limitation there if you jam it down too fast, too far. But I think that, especially for like track use, a slipper clutch is something that you don't think about needing until you feel it actually working, and you're not getting that rear wheel chatter.
Yeah. And I think on the topic of aspiring new riders, there are situations in which like I've made this mistake in my motorcycling career where I'm accelerating in some situation. I'm in third gear and I'm like, and then I go to shift, and then it's messed up and I shift the wrong way, and I go down to second gear instead of upshifting to fourth gear. And that's a scenario like that. And it's a situation in which the rear wheel can chatter and hop, and it can give you quite a spook. The slipper clutch would help in that situation. But yeah, mostly like you said,
and you've seen it. Like my point is that slipper clutches, while at one point were reserved for, high end track use motorcycles, you're now seeing pretty much motorcycles from $4,000 or $5,000 up to $15,000, $20,000 have a slipper clutch in there. It just makes the whole riding experience a lot smoother. Yeah.
It's and it doesn't do any harm. It doesn't change the way the bike rides as you accelerate, only as you decelerate. That's probably enough about slipper clutches. So Spurg, let's move on. Who's drawn out of the hat first for this discussion on terminology?
What are you drawing out of? Are you drawing out of a giant fishbowl helmet too?
No. Oh, I don't have a helmet. I'm just drawing out of I'm drawing out of a proverbial hat, you might say.
Oh man. Well, then I'm going to go first because I have this shiny Icon helmet.
I see that. It's
all right.
I'm going to avert my eyes so it doesn't burn my corneas.
What I would say is I think it's going to be important for Zach and I to take a deep breath and make sure that we're truly trying to explain this stuff as best as possible. We'll put visuals up on the screen.
Yeah.
Hopefully with slipper clutch and 280-degree crank, we haven't completely lost you from the start. But let me ask a question from Bridget. Bridget, thank you for writing in. Bridget's terms are all related to suspension. When we say things like preload, rebound, and damping, what are we talking about?
What are we talking about? There's got to be an Ari Henning video on this, right?
Well, while you look for it, I'll start with the basics.
There you go. You start.
If we're talking about preload is just that. You are preloading the springs on your suspension. So depending on the kind
some of which you can see, some of which you cannot.
Wait, what?
Some of the springs. These are like the springs in the fork, and you can't see those springs, but there are springs in there. Is my point.
Yes. Unless you're. Yes, there's air forks too, and I don't want to get into this now.
No, that's not. Yeah,
the term preload just means you're putting extra pressure on the suspension ahead of time to make it a little bit stiffer. You're preloading the spring so it has less room to move.
Yes.
Now, when you talk about rebound and damping, those terms work together. There is rebound damping and there is compression damping on a suspension circuit. And I am by no means a suspension expert the way that Ari Henning is, but I have paid many dollars to have my suspension upgraded. But with rebound and compression damping, what you're doing is that if you have a spring, that spring is just bouncing at a steady rate. So you have nothing slowing it down or speeding it up. So that's where you add in additional fluid around the spring. And there's complex circuits here where you can have separate chambers and all that jazz. But essentially there is compression damping, which in addition to the spring compressing, there is fluid in there and you can adjust the chambers in which the fluid moves through valves.
The size of the orifice that the fluid flows through.
The hole. Orifice is another word for hole.
Thank you.
So you can close the hole and slow down the fluid for more compression or less compression, and you can help to speed or slow up the circuit. And the same with rebound, how quickly that spring comes back up on you. So if you have no rebound damping, that spring can go up as fast as you compress it, and it's going to pogo you back up. Leads for a very bumpy ride. So you can add in things like rebound damping, and that will slow down the rate at which the spring returns to its full length, which you've preloaded to, and it will just not allow it to bounce back on you. Now, in a lot of motorcycles, this might not be adjustable, and there is a set amount of preload and compression and rebound damping already built into the circuit. But on more advanced motorcycles, across all genres, on-road, off-road, and everything in between, there are adjusters, and you can adjust to fine-tune exactly how that suspension feels for both preload, compression, and rebound damping.
Two things I'd like to call out. One, there is an episode of the Shop Manual with our friend Ari Henning. It is called Motorcycle Suspension Terminology Explained. 385,000 other people have watched that episode. If you're not one of them, you could click on that video, and 7 minutes and 22 seconds later, you will probably be a lot smarter when it comes to suspension lingo. So the other thing I'd like to call out is that the adjustability that your bike has is something that I recommend you play with. It's something that you can sometimes even without the motorcycle moving, you can adjust the rebound damping on your fork, and then when you bounce the fork, you'll feel it return a little bit slower as you add rebound damping. As you remove rebound damping, you'll feel the fork bounce back faster. That's something you can mess around with and hopefully learn how it feels, what it means, and like sort of practically how it feels to make those adjustments, because that's the kind of refinement that you can tweak and add to your motorcycle to make your ride more better, more the way you want it. More better. The other shout out I'll give here too is, and I know that Mr. Henning, who we've talked about a lot now, with his TSM programming, he's a man who loves terminology.
He is.
Yes.
Check out your owner's manual that comes with your motorcycle, because what I've really liked with a lot of newer owner's manuals is they give you baseline settings for your suspension and how to set preload, how to set compression, how to set rebound for different intended uses. So, if it's not a brand new BMW R1300 GS with electronically push button adjustable suspension, maybe it's an older model Tiger 800, for example, from Triumph. And I thought it was great because my owner's manual said, like, if you want a sportier setting, this is where you put all the clickers to. And not that that's going to be perfect for you, right? But it's a great place to start. Baseline. Because if Zach's saying, oh, go play with your clickers, and you're not sure up or down or how to do that, the owner's manual saying, this is the relationship and this is the feel change, and just kind of setting them differently to get that understanding. I think the owner's manual presettings will help you understand some of that.
I like that. And also, I never said, quote, go play with your clickers. That's not something I said. And don't tell your parents that Highside, Lowside said that. That's not what I said. I'm going to check
the tape. I'm pretty sure you've told me numerous times to go play with my clickers.
Well, yes. Okay, let's move on. The point is, watch the Shop Manual episode with Ari. You'll learn a lot about suspension, and hopefully that's a quick breakdown of. I shudder to think you could probably do a whole podcast just on damping and preload and suspension settings. Spurgeon, you're a man who loves suspension.
I wouldn't want to. I think that would be boring for the average person. I would want to bring somebody in that's much more, that could speak to it much more eloquently than I can. But Bridget, hopefully that helps to give you a basic understanding when we're talking about preload, rebound, compression, damping. We're talking about suspension settings. So rebound and compression, damping, and then preload is loading the spring.
Spring preload. Okay, we're gonna move on. Spurge, shall I draw? Shall I draw? I'm drawing.
The next drawing from the non-hat. I can't read it because your screen is blurry on my side. Chicken strips.
Chicken strips, everybody. So this is kind of a fun one, I think. Chicken strips. So
what you had for dinner last night.
Right.
If we were playing Jeopardy, it would be, you have to put in the form of a question.
If someone says that you have big chicken strips, that would be a pejorative. I would say the person's making fun of you. Chicken strips are
call them a turkey. Remember those commercials from the 80s?
Hang on,
I'm not a chicken. You're sorry.
Stay focused.
Getting distracted.
Chicken strips are the band of untouched rubber between the edge of your tire and where you have worn the tire by leaning over. So newer, less experienced riders will often have a larger band around their tire, on the edge of their tire, of rubber that is untouched from asphalt because the bike has not been leaned over. So if you, like an experienced track day rider, when they come in off the track, all of the tire surface has touched the asphalt because of their enormous skill and good looks, I assume. So it is a sort of like a derogatory term to say like, oh, the chicken strips are big. You know, you got big chicken strips, and it's obviously, multifaceted sort of jab, right, Spurge? Because, you know, you don't lean over, you're a chicken strips type of food. It's kind of the perfect zing in many ways.
Well, I would just say it's something where, don't take offense to it. You know, if somebody comes up and they're talking about your chicken strips, you know, you can figure out a zinger to throw back at them.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something
not a
that
good person.
I think for me, when I was starting out with this, I used it as a gauge of like, cool, am I improving? Right. And I don't think that it's necessarily the perfect gauge because, depending on how you're using your body to lean the bike over, and maybe you're putting more of your body weight off the motorcycle. You know, there's different ways that you can potentially be getting a knee down on the ground without using all of your tire, right? There's different ways that you can look at it. But I think for a lot of new riders out there, if you're out riding on a curvy road, you can take a look at your rear tire when you're done. And you're like, oh, I'm leaning over more on the right side, or I appear to be more confident leaning over on the right side than I do the left side. Yeah. Or, you could use it as a gauge of like, hey, when I started off riding, I had these big 1/2 inch, strips on either side of the tire that weren't getting used. I wasn't using the whole tire. But now after a year or two, there's only a little 1/4 inch strip left on the side of the tire. And I think you can use it as a personal gauge as well to, how your lean angles are improving.
Yeah. I think that's a good call out. What I wanted to circle back to was don't put a lot of stock in the chicken strips. Like don't anyone making fun of you, or making fun of themselves about big chicken strips is probably just having a good time. That's the way I've always, experienced it anyway. Like it's more playful than anything because as Spurge said, it doesn't really mean a lot at the end of the day. So there's certain tires are not all created equal for one. Sometimes tires have really, really steep profiles on the edge, especially front tires, especially Pirelli, sport front tires. I've noticed, like I've ridden with very experienced riders on a very spirited ride. They're riding quite well, or even like in a performance setting on a racetrack and coming off the track and the edge of the tire is not all the way used. It's not a clear delineator of how fast the person is or how much skill they have. It's just sort of a fun jab that you can throw at your friends or you can, make fun of yourself or whatever.
Yeah. And I think too, if you're a rider that's starting off on the adventure side or the dirt side, with knobby tires, this isn't going to be, it's not going to be equal as well, to Zach's point about, I don't know, tires being different.
Do dirt bikers have a chicken strip equivalent? Like if you're not chewing up your knobs fast enough, are you like not cool? Cause you got like, Your tires are still fresh after
just a big knob. Yeah. You don't want a big knob. You want small knobs.
you want the, I'm not sure what you want. Whatever.
Worn knobs. All right.
Your turn. Go for
hopefully, who is that one from? Did that one have a name?
Thomas. That was, sorry, I didn't call that out. So I appreciate the note there, Thomas. So you're wondering about chicken strips. Hopefully, may your chicken strips be thin and, I don't know.
Tasty.
There you go.
All right. The next one from the fancy helmet comes in from Kristen, and it just says shoes. Kristen wants to know about shoes. So
okay,
I'm brake shoes.
Okay,
or like steel shoes.
Okay.
For like flat track racing?
I thought maybe like a reference to tires, like sneakers. Like my bike got new shoes, my bike got new sneakers.
Oh.
New buns, new sneakers, new rubber, new tires. Tires. Okay. I don't know.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I think like a
slang.
Yeah, it's more slang than it is terminology. But I think that's probably, that could be it. You made a couple good call outs though, Spurg. Shoes, another thing shoes can refer to in motorcycling is brake shoes. Now, motorcycles that have disc brakes don't have shoes, they have pads. Motorcycles that have drum brakes would have shoes. That's kind of an old technology. So, I hear, your great aunt or your grandpa or something talking about brake shoes. They're talking about braking shoes.
Yeah. So I would just say for that particular one, if you're a motorcyclist listening to this podcast, chances are you have disc brakes on your motorcycle.
Yeah.
And you have two pads that squeeze down. Actually, my niece was just over at the house today, and I was trying to explain to her that I was going to change my wife's brake pads on her car. And I was showing her with a rotor and the two pads how a brake system works. And
sure,
if you look on a motorcycle, it's actually really easy to show someone because you have a rotor, which is the disc that sits on the wheel of your motorcycle. And then you have two pads in a caliper, and that caliper has pistons that are two cylinders, which squeeze down on the pads. But if you have a brake shoe, this is typically on an older motorcycle,
right? There
would be a big drum in the center of your wheel. And inside that, there are
shoes,
which are just like brake pads, but vertically or horizontally mounted.
Semicircular.
And they push out. Yeah. And they push out on the inside of that big circle.
Right. They do. You actually bring up an interesting, Ari has a great story about going to a shop years ago, which I won't name, but he said, I need to get a new piston for for this bike brake caliper, or maybe it was a master cylinder piston. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was like, I need this piece of braking equipment and it's a piston. And the guy behind the counter said, I think you're confused, man. Pistons are in your engine. There aren't any pistons in your brakes. And then Ari was like, do you have a manager that I can speak to? So the point is, even occasionally people who work at motorcycle dealerships or establishments get confused with terminology. So shoes, I think, was probably a reference to tires. I'm guessing. Chase is sitting next to you, right? Is that what? Do we know? Does Chase have any insight here?
He's shaking his head that we're both right, apparently. And what I would say is, if you're hearing us talk about slang as it infers, go put some new shoes on your bike.
Right.
It's mostly probably about tires.
Right.
But if someone's talking to you about a vintage motorcycle and replacing the shoes on the front brakes, it is the brake lining which slows you down. And if you do have questions, check out an article on Common Tread called Ari's Answers, all about brakes, where he goes through all the different things that you would need to know about brake pads, brake shoes, brake fluid, and brake calipers. That will do a much better job of painting a picture about this half of the answer, if it is shoes as related to brakes.
Okay. I'm going to move on. Is that okay?
Thank you, Kristen. Move on, Zachary. Take us to the next one.
Okay, next one. I'm going to say the name this time. Dale. Dale wrote in and asked, what the heck is a pillion?
Ooh.
Pillion. That's Pillion. Pillion.
That is French for a tiny puff pastry dessert. And typically this is what Zach eats when he's at fancy press launches. in Europe.
Okay, that's one guess. Pillion refers to a passenger. That's the short answer. But I did a little bit of digging here, Spurg, on the derivation of the word pillion, and I went to some etymology website to learn about words because I kind of like doing that. A pillion is what this
what is
says.
etymology, Zach? Is that a tiny bean that I get at a sushi restaurant, or is that something different?
Oh my God, this is like, we should just do where you have to do a non sequitur into something random, and that could be a whole podcast. Not entomology, which has to do with insects, not edamame, which are tiny beans at a sushi restaurant, but rather etymology, which has to do with the derivation of words. Pillion, says this website, is a kind of light, simple saddle, especially for women, and is of Celtic origin. Later also defined as an adjustable pad or cushion behind a saddle as a seat for a second person, usually a woman, is what it says.
So it comes from horsing.
Comes from... Yes, horsing. Exactly what I was going to say.
I'm trying to use
it comes
because we're going to throw out equestrian, and then it's like, what's an equestrian?
Oh, come on! If you don't know what equestrian is, you got to back up. You can't be part of such an astute and you know, really intellectual podcast.
What's your equestrian sign? I'm an Aries.
Oh my God!
See, it's just
so. Pillion has its roots
way off topic here.
as a small saddle behind her saddle on a horse. Basically, just means a pad. It's another way to say, like, you know, my passenger, the pillion seat, something like that. That's all it really means.
Yeah.
Any?
Well, that was a fun little.
Have you ever had a passenger on a motorcycle, Spurgeon? Probably not with that sense of humor.
I've had plenty of people have passengered on my Pillion, Zach. How about yourself?
That's different. And I can't go down that road.
Can I ask a question? Do you prefer, do you feel comfortable being a pillion rider? As a motorcyclist? Like, it bothers me. Like, I have a hard time trusting other people as a passenger, as a motorcyclist. Like, do you find yourself being comfortable as a passenger?
I think any good, confident motorcyclist struggles a little bit being a passenger on a motorcycle, right? Because you want to make your own decisions. That's one of the things we like about riding motorcycles, is being in control. However, I'll say this. I think if you have not done it very much or at all, and you have an opportunity to do it, to be a passenger with someone you trust as a rider, that's crucial. I do think it can offer insight into your own practices and processes, because you can do nothing but think about the decisions that person's making, right, Spurge? When you're on the back. And I think that can be really valuable. Have you ever found that?
I think it's valuable in helping you make sure that your future pillion riders are comfortable.
Yes, because exactly right. Sometimes you ride with people and you're like, oh man, they're not doing a very good job shifting smoothly or something like that. And you're like, oh, now I know that
they're slamming on the brakes and they're not giving me a heads up or
Yeah. Yep. Normally when I ride pillion any time in the past, I don't know, a few years, it's usually with Ari, because we're like picking something up, or he's had to take me somewhere to pick up another bike, or we're shooting an episode of something and I'm on the back with him. And he is a very thoughtful rider with a passenger on the back, because he's done it a lot. An unselfish lover, you might say. And that doesn't come as a surprise.
No, speaking of unselfish lovers, didn't you and your wife like have a scooter where you would ride on the back with her riding you around?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, I sold my scooter. And occasionally we ride motorcycles around, like usually small motorcycles that she's sort of more comfortable with. And I ride on the back and I love it. I think it's great. Because we get to share in this thing that, you know, we're doing something together, that I enjoy and she enjoys a little less. But it's fun. I think it's really fun. I think it's like such a great thing to do with a partner, because you sort of like, I don't know, it offers a chance to communicate differently and talk about something new. And so I just love it.
Right on. Well, if you have heard us say the word pillion before and you haven't understood what we were talking about,
right.
Hopefully that one helps.
Thank you, Dale. Let's move on, Spurge.
Let's do it. The next pick. Oh, I picked out 2. I got to throw one back.
No, don't do that. Yeah, there you go.
Can't catch 2 fish at one time. If I know anything about fishing.
Dunbar.
Matt writes in and says, what is Enduro?
Enduro. Huh. So at some point, maybe Spurge and I were talking and we said, like, you could get like a small Enduro if you want. Like, that'd be cool if you live somewhere that's near the woods. And maybe Matt was like, Enduro? What's that?
Or what if it was, we're going to go take an Enduro race, or I was out at an Enduro race this past weekend.
Right. Enduro. Mm. Yeah, it is kind of a weird word, I suppose. Enduro, Matt, is an off-road motorcycle, I suppose. I don't know the etymology of this one really.
It comes from
endurance,
so this
I assume.
Would be a long race for automobiles or motorcycles, stressing endurance rather than speed. Is where it stems from. So typically for motorcycling, when we're talking about enduros, we are talking about off-road riding. So
yes. or off-road motorcycles of some ilk.
Exactly.
Yep. And I think that that's sort of the takeaway is like, as a piece of motorcycle terminology, it's like an enduro, it could be a specific kind of race or competition, as Spurgeon said. But more broadly, it refers to the type of machine that one might use for that type of off-road race. In other words, a bike that is a dirt bike broadly, but like one that is probably more suited to ride for long distances. Either it has lights on it or a slightly more comfortable seat or something like that. Do you think that's fair, Spurge, or am I completely blowing that up?
Yeah, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here. For those people that really
it's an Enduro joke. Get it in the weeds on the. Oh, I thought you were.
No, that was good.
Nice,
you're. Yeah, I didn't even mean for that to be a joke, but it's hilarious, and I thank you for that. This episode is already
terrible.
It's
going to be the worst one we've ever done, but I'm having fun.
I'm having fun with that. I just feel bad for the people that are rolling their eyes at home. If you are, there's all different types. I don't want to get into like, there's a timekeeping Enduro or an Enduro versus a rally. I don't do that. But what I will say, when Zach's talking about motorcycle types, if you're not somebody that owns dirt bikes or follows dirt bikes, there are 2 generally different kinds. There's like, you can go buy a motocross bike, which is typically set up from a suspension standpoint and from a gearing standpoint with the transmission to handle higher speeds and bigger jumps. If you are looking for an enduro type off-road ride, that is typically set up a little bit softer on the suspension for rocks and other obstacles where you're not taking them at high rates of speed and jumping. But rather, in obstacles in the woods or whatnot. And then the gearing is typically a little bit different because you're not looking for that big top end speed like you would be on a motocross track. So if you really are starting to take a pathway down the off-road, shopping experience, just be mindful that there are different types of dirt bikes out there. Even though they look the same from the outside, you should really make sure you're getting the right one.
Right. That's fair. I also think it's fair to call it the Enduro. I think was a term that was, I don't know if coined really, but was more widely used, I think, like in the 70s. Agreed? Like that was when sort of broad use dirt biking became a slice of Americana and American motorcycling, I would say. And like you'll see bikes that say 250 Enduro on the side. And you don't really see that anymore, right? Like I don't think bikes are labeled as Enduros, even though the origins are the same.
Yeah, we still see it like for like the East Coast Enduro Association of racing. Okay. There's timekeeping enduros.
I guess I meant more like
it's still being used.
I meant more like from an OE branding standpoint,
yes,
like splashed on the side of a bike or something like that. Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. Well, hopefully that helps with at least a little general idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about enduros. It's either depending on how we're using it, it's either a type of motorcycle or it's a type of motorcycle racing that is in the off-road sphere. So hopefully that helps you out, Matt. Zach, I'm going to let you pick the next one. But before we do, let's get a word from our sponsor, Moto.
Indeed.
All right, we are back from Moto. Zach, as promised, you're up, buddy.
I'm up. I'm doing a draw. I'm draw. Ah, interesting, actually. This comes in from Jordan, and the word is sissy. I repeat, sissy, Sissy. And I struggle to think when this would be used in a motorcycle conversation aside from a sissy bar, right?
That's the only thing I could think of.
If someone is using the term sissy around you, Jordan, with reference to your motorcycling, that might be a different conversation. And I don't really know what to say to that, except I hope that you find more supportive friends soon.
I feel like we've probably said with Patrick Garvin talking about the cruiser segments, sissy bar.
You put a sissy bar on
and it comes from, it's basically just like a backrest for your passenger. They're not tough enough to, ride for hundreds of miles without falling off the back. So there's a backrest there to make it a more comfortable experience for them, I think is where that term comes from.
Yes, indeed. And the term sissy, and I looked this one up too, just because I was curious. The derivation is basically the word sister. So that's where that comes from. So it's a sister bar to some extent. It's a
sister bar.
Right. Your sister goes on the back.
Whatever. If we're talking about it though, it is passenger backrest more than anything.
That's all.
All right, let's move on.
What do you got, Spurge?
From Jordan. Jordan wrote in and
that's the same. Was it the same Jordan? I just did a Jordan.
I don't have last names.
Maybe it's the same Jordan. Whatever. It doesn't matter.
Maybe it's the same one. Center stand. I think we talked about this most recently on the modifying your motorcycle episode. What is a center stand?
Well, that would be a stand in the center of your motorcycle, as opposed to the kickstand on which your motorcycle leans over to the left. Usually, the center stand is like has a little kick pad on it, and you push that down and lift the motorcycle up as you push down on the center stand, and then the bike sits on two legs of the center stand, and usually the front or rear tire, so the bike is completely upright. Nice and handy for touring motorcycles where you're packing luggage, that kind of thing.
It's handy for touring motorcycles. It's handy for oil changes because it holds the bike completely upright. It's
tire
also
changes,
handy,
new shoes,
tire changes. You get brake pads, brake shoes. All kinds of stuff. So basically, a center stand is a way for you to not have the motorcycle leaning over, and it does help with maintenance either on a trip or just in your garage, not having to pull the bike up and drain all the oil out that way.
Are you pro center stand or anti center stand, Spurge?
I feel like we've talked about this already. If you haven't already listened to the episode on modifying your motorcycle, I am pro center stand in most cases. I have had some problems with center stands on adventure bikes if you're riding a little bit aggressively off road, where they can be bouncing around and get caught on things. But for the most part, I am a pro center stand individual.
And maybe we said this already in that other podcast because clearly I don't remember anything, but if you have a motorcycle that has an underslung exhaust, an exhaust pipe that is largely collected under the motorcycle, in front of the rear wheel and under the engine and transmission, those motorcycles can sometimes prohibit the use of a center stand. And that can be a bummer. So if you think you're pro center stand and you think you love it, keep that in mind next time you're shopping for a motorcycle to ride.
Yeah, I think center stand was something that we talked about before on the podcast from just, you don't see them as much anymore. And I think that's a shame. I do enjoy a good motorcycle center stand.
Okay, I'm doing a draw.
Do it.
Speaking of touring motorcycles with luggage, the word is pannier. Pannier. This comes in from Winnie, who's wondering what the heck a pannier is. Or maybe said, yeah, you just like put some stuff in your panniers. And that person wondered what the heck it is. So what's a pannier?
Well, I was trying to find the edamame.
I already looked up the edamame version. I got it ready to go. You just need to explain practically, and then I'll go into the
saddlebags. A pannier is a saddlebag. So it is. I'll let Zach give you the full down and dirty history of the word. But oftentimes, where this is being used in modern terms is with a metal adventure type side rack. Oftentimes those are referred to panniers more often than not. But realistically, soft saddlebags, any kind of a saddlebag is also a pannier.
Yes, indeed. And I think sometimes people will say like, oh no, panniers means hard luggage, or like panniers are only soft and then a saddlebag is hard luggage. Well, the derivation of the term saddlebag is probably pretty obvious. Also comes from horsing, as Spurg would say. And that's an easier term to understand. Pannier, the derivation of that word, for what it's worth, goes back to circa the year 1300, pannier, which meant a large basket for provisions, a basket in which you would carry. So makes sense, right? It's a place where you keep your stuff. And that's all it means in the terms of motorcycle. And I don't think there's actually is there an agreed upon, like pannier means soft luggage and saddlebag means hard luggage?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, me neither. I think that's all malarkey.
Yeah, I think if we're referencing panniers, we're talking about saddlebags. We're talking about two bags that you throw over the back of your motorcycle, hanging on each side.
I remember, just really quick. I remember way back when someone saying, oh no, panniers are the things that go over a tank. Cause you had like, panniers that would go over a gas tank, like on a vintage motorcycle that had smaller, lower gas tanks. Like I'm talking, it's 1970s bikes or something like that. Sometimes they would have this like canvas bag that would drape over the top of the gas tank and you could put stuff in the bags there.
Those are gas tank panniers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad I had this discussion. I'm learning stuff too.
I think when I think of panniers, it's anything that you're hanging over the motorcycle, right?
Yeah.
There's one on each side. You're hanging over. I think with hard luggage, it's not draped over the motorcycle the same way you would drape saddlebags over a horse. But it is the same concept. And I will say, as we transition outside of panniers, because I think we've defined it, we are working on a new Highside, Lowside t-shirt, where the focus is going to be the engine sound guessing game in a t-shirt form. Oh, and really? I feel like horsing should somehow work into this, where if like Spurgeon mentions horsing, you have to pound your entire beer.
Sorry. So you're talking about, you say drinking game. You said we were working on a t-shirt to do with engine sound guessing game, but you meant a drinking game.
Yes. So the Highside Lowside drinking game is something we've referenced. It was one of our Highside Lowside listeners wrote in and made a whole list of rules. We've read it in a previous episode, but now we're going to make it into a t-shirt. And I feel like we should talk about horsing. If one of the hosts mentions horsing, then you have to pound whatever drink you're having.
There are a lot.
Limited.
There are a lot of motorcycle, sort of like terms and whatever that come from horsing. As the person said, it's true. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on.
What's the next one?
I'm moving on.
Is it your turn? No, but it's my turn.
Your turn. Yeah.
Yes, you had panniers.
Pannier.
Alrighty. This is from Felix. Felix. Oh, Zach, this one's right up your alley.
Is it now?
Backing the bike in.
Backing it in.
What am I doing, Zach, if I'm backing it in?
Backing it in. Backing it in is a sort of move that motorcyclists pull off sometimes, usually racing motorcycles. When you're headed toward a corner, you start braking, and as you're braking with the front brake, the back of the motorcycle starts to like step out of line, starts to slide out, outside the wheel track of the front tire, right? So it's no longer tracking on the same wheel track as the front tire. It's now sliding out to the side. Sometimes motorcyclists will do this on purpose. They'll drag the back brake and it slows down the rear wheel just a little bit, and it allows the rear to slide out like that. This is something that started happening, I feel like most prevalently in superbike racing in the late 90s or early 2000s, I feel like, was when I started seeing it in the road race world, which is sort of my background. Of course, this is very common for like, flat track, oval dirt track racing in the 70s, a la On Any Sunday, that kind of thing. But backing it in is basically, the rear wheel slowing down more than the front wheel, and the back of the motorcycle stepping out into a slide as you decelerate. And it can be done by accident. It can be done on purpose. But when it happens, it is known as backing it in.
And to be clear on this, just, for people listening that are like, oh, I'm going to go try it. You're not slamming down on the rear brake so hard that you're locking the rear brake up to initiate the slide. I think that's something that oftentimes can be a bit confusing. Like Zach said, you're slowly applying pressure. You're not trying to lock up the rear brake. Correct?
Right. The rear wheel is just slowing down a little bit more than the front. It's honestly like so many things in motorcycling, like dragging your knee or dragging your elbow or doing a wheelie. It's really just a lot cooler when it happens by accident than when it happens on purpose, if we're being perfectly honest. But it is something that you can grow into doing intentionally, and it can be fun in the right environment. And yeah, that's where it comes from, and that's what it means. And it's a cool maneuver, I think, ultimately.
All right.
But
I've seen you do it before. You're quite the maneuverer.
I like a good maneuver here and there.
Yeah.
All right, it's my turn, right?
Hopefully that one helps you out, Felix.
Yeah, I hope that helps you. Watch some Daily Rider. We do some back ends on Daily Rider. Okay, I'm drawing. Draw. Well, back to nature. James wants to know, what are squids? Squids.
We've had a whole campaign on this on RevZilla.
And we have beware of the
squid terms. The return of the squids. Beware of the squids. That was the sequel. So a squid is typically a derogatory kind of slang term for riders that, maybe they're wearing flip-flops and t-shirts. They're not wearing appropriate gear, or they're out doing stupid stuff on their motorcycle that, can be a little bit dangerous if they don't know what they're doing correctly.
Right.
So it's typically either inexperienced or just people that don't take safety first when they're out there riding. Is that right?
Yeah. I would say an ill-prepared rider, often riding above their head, over their head. Yeah. That's something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
It's certainly
some closed-toe shoes on.
Right. If someone says like, oh, look at those squids, or like, oh, that guy's riding like a squid, that means like, that's not good. You don't want to be squiddly.
Yeah. Don't want to be squiddly. That's a verb.
Do you know?
It can be a noun or it can be a verb.
Do you know where squids came from? The term?
The ocean.
No.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the right answer.
You know what I mean. Where did the term squid come from? Why squid for a rider who doesn't know what they're doing?
I can't tell if you're asking me this question because you have the answer somewhere in front of you, or I don't know. I don't know. I've just known that this is what it is. Squid.
I know. I don't Know either. And I feel like we're really letting people down because
I wonder if it comes from horsing. I wonder if this is like a horsing term.
Sure. Okay. Well,
I'm checking to see, but I don't.
It's your turn.
Where's squid? Yeah, it says the ocean.
I would be surprised if the term for a motorcycling squid had anything to do with equine life, but maybe.
Some people think that it is a term developed from the mashup of the words squirrely or squished. That can't be right. Can it?
I think it's your turn to draw a new term.
All right.
There you go.
Yeah, squirrely. It comes from squirrely. Squirrely kid, squid. Squirrely kid, squid. That's what. Hey, listen. AI is never wrong. Squirrely kid, squid. Don't be a squirrely kid out there.
Don't be a squirrely kid.
Oh, this is from Kyle and Nate. Kyle wrote in Highside. Nate wrote in Lowside.
We should have started with this one. Right.
As Highside and Lowside. Where does our name come from, Zachary?
Well, there are both types of crashes. A low side would be when you're going through a corner and say you lose traction on the front tire, and it just sort of, or the rear tire, and just so the bike falls over. It just falls. You're taking a left-hand corner and you lose traction and you fall over on the left side of the motorcycle and you slide off into the gravel trap because you're at a track day because you're a responsible, performance-minded motorcyclist. A high side would be when you're going through a left-hand corner, say, could be that same left-hand corner that you already crashed in, so you ought to be careful. But here you go through that same left-hand corner and you lose traction on most commonly the rear, like you would slide the rear tire, under acceleration, too much throttle, for example, and the tire slides and then it catches and the bike flips over and it lands on its right side. And in doing so, it throws you, the rider, over the high side of the motorcycle. And then you land on your right shoulder, and then, but then you get up and you're fine, because in this story, everybody has a happy ending.
Because you're wearing a Alpine Stars airbag.
There we go. Now we're getting into
you.
Company.
But anyway. This is like, this goes back to Felix's question about backing it in. And I had asked Zach, I'm like, you don't want to lock that rear brake up, because one of the first things they teach in your motorcycle training is that if you lock that rear brake up and you just let go of the rear brake, and that all of a sudden that back wheel catches,
right?
It's a pretty easy way to fling you high into the air.
Right. They teach you not to do that in, MSF courses, safety courses, that kind of thing, because that's what can happen. So yeah, Highside and Lowside are crash terms, which is why they were chosen for the, as a tongue in cheek name for this podcast. And that pretty much summarizes it, right? Did we miss anything there?
Have you ever low-sided or high-sided a motorcycle deck?
Oh, Spurgeon. Oh boy. Yes. in my many years of road racing motorcycles, which road racing, while we're doing terminology, doesn't mean that I'm racing on a road. It just means it's a closed course, paved
asphalt
simulated road, right? That is a closed course. And when you race those motorcycles around and drag your knee and lean over and avoid chicken strips and so on and so forth, you are road racing, even though you're not on a public road. I just want that to be clear. But yes, I have low-sided and high-sided many times. More low sides than high sides, I would say, which is how you want it.
Which is a good thing. Yeah.
Yep. But this is the main reason, for what it's worth, for traction control. This is sort of the main, cultural prerogative for traction control existing, is that when people are going through a corner, they're pulling out of a gas station, they're going through an intersection, they're exiting their favorite hairpin on their favorite Sunday ride, whatever it is, and they give too much throttle and they lose rear traction, it can turn into a high side. And traction control systems mitigate that by mitigating the power that's being delivered to the rear wheel and saving those. So that's just a quick sidebar.
And just for fun, Zach made a comment here about road racing. You can low side and or high side a motorcycle off road as well.
Oh, certainly. Yes.
Where I've gotten the most action. I've high sided many a motorcycle, but to Zach's point, I have low sided more than I've high sided, which is again how you want it. It's a lot more comfortable to walk away.
What's your wildest high side story, Spurge?
I will say my most embarrassing one was I was at American Super Camp, and they give you these little 125s, right. CC, 125 cc, little tiny dirt bikes. And in theory, they're easy to low side, but you really gotta be trying if you want to crash them. And I high sided the hell out of one. I was going through American Super Camp is a traveling flat track school, which is a lot of fun. If you ever get a chance to do it, it's a whole weekend. And at the end of each day, you get to go out and you get to just race. They build a little course and you get to go out in this little TT track and you get to race around. And I was on the beans and I was going through a corner and I locked up the whole rear and it was sliding perfectly. And then I just was like, I'm going to get on it. And I cranked the throttle and just the wheel caught and it launched me off over the hay bale into the next course over. It was magnificent. It was beautiful.
Sounds spectacular.
But I was wearing all the safety gear and I got up and I walked away.
Right. So right.
Because it was a closed course. It was somewhere where you want to be.
Somewhere
if you're going to crash, crash where you can learn from it. How about you? What was your most spectacular high side?
Gosh. Well, you brought up the most embarrassing one. And I thought, Ari and I did a 24-hour race on a 50cc motorcycle one time years ago, and I managed to high side that motorcycle. It was on a little two-stroke 50cc bike on a go-kart track, and we did a 24-hour race. And by God, I was pushing it. I was trying to go as fast as I could, and I lost rear traction somehow with whatever it was, 4 horsepower, and I high sided it. And boy, did people make fun of me for high siding such a slow motorcycle, but.
You can do it.
You can do it. You can always find a way. Okay. I'm going to move on. I'm going to draw a new term here. Oh goodness. Oh, I've gone a little bit red in the face. I don't know if I can say this one out loud. Can you say it for me, Spurge, please?
Morgan wants to know what a petcock is.
Indeed.
That is one word, not two. Petcock.
Petcock. A petcock is a valve, essentially. In motorcycling, it is the valve on the bottom of the gas tank that either allows the flow or stops the flow of gasoline going from the gas tank to the engine, to the carburetor, the fuel system. That's all. That's all it really is.
Much more common when you have a motorcycle with carburetors.
Yes,
you're not really
indeed.
seeing petcocks much anymore with fuel injection. My first bike, the Bonneville, had a petcock, and I remember when I bought the bike asking the salesman, I'm like, I don't know what does this do? And he's like, oh, it's a petcock. And I was like, buddy.
And you're like, yeah, I think there's a list for those people.
yeah, we can't. Let's just keep this piece PG. And really with the Bonneville, it's like you can turn the fuel off, you can turn the fuel on, and then you can turn it up, which goes into a reserve. So I didn't have
reserve.
I didn't have a fuel gauge on that bike.
Right.
So you would put the bike, you would turn the fuel on, you would ride the bike until the fuel would run out.
Right.
And then you'd be riding on the highway and the bike would start to sputter, and you reach down and you grab your petcock and you flip it up. And then you're in the reserve. What you don't want to do is you don't want to fill your tank up, forget that your petcock is set to reserve.
Correct.
Because then when you run out of gas, there's no reserve left.
Exactly. That's a good
People don't realize how lucky they have it with these modern bikes with fuel injection,
fuel gauges and fuel lights.
Gauges.
Yeah. I know. It's true. That was a fun little blast of the past there, Spurge, with the on-off reserve. I had almost forgotten that's how you had to ride a motorcycle.
Don't forget.
Hopefully that helps, Morgan. I looked up the etymology of petcock. It wasn't that interesting. You can look it up if you're interested. I'll let you do it. Oddly not no horsing in that history there. Yeah. Your turn, Spurge. Pull a term.
Back to my helmet. My pieces of paper are getting stuck in my helmet liner. That is not something I anticipated.
You hate to see it.
All right. Chris wrote in, and this goes back to, it's similar to what Samantha kicked us off with. But Chris wants to know, what are rear sets? Zach, what's a rear set?
I just put some rear sets on my bike. They're really cool.
What did you put on? What's a rear set? I don't know what that is. What's a rear set?
Foot pegs. Rear sets are foot pegs. And that term obviously goes back to when motorcycling, maybe not obviously, as far as I understand it, I should say. That term goes back to when motorcycles often had fairly neutral or, relatively forward set foot pegs. And if you wanted your bike to be a little bit racier, a little bit sportier, yeah, exactly. You were going to take it to a racetrack and ride it around. You didn't want to drag those foot pegs, so you'd take those foot pegs off. Sometimes it had a whole steel bar that went under the engine, under the frame, a whole thing, and you'd take those off and you'd put on a different set of foot pegs that were higher and set farther back. Rear set. They were rear set, and that terminology lives on today. Like you might say, oh, I put rear sets on my Yamaha R6. Now, a Yamaha R6 is a sport bike, very aggressive ergonomics. It already basically comes with rear sets, essentially. The foot pegs are rear set. But it has been adopted, I think, as terminology for motorcycles when you get sort of like aftermarket foot pegs that are adjustable. Sometimes you say like, oh, I got adjustable rear sets, or I put on different rear sets. And that's the term. Did I miss anything?
Yep. Nope. I think that's a great definition. It's typically found in the sport bike world. And to Zach's point, if somebody's referring to, oh, I put a set of rear sets on my bike, most likely it's a bike that is designed for aggressive riding that they want some additional adjustability for. Maybe they just want an extra inch or two of room where they're not dragging the foot peg on the ground.
Right.
Or they just want it in a different position so that when they're out doing a track session, it's a bit more comfortable for them to ride. Or in some cases, they want it to be a little bit lower. So if they're using a sportier bike on the street, it gives them a little bit more room from a bend in the knee standpoint. So there's different adjustability if people are putting aftermarket rear sets on their bike. But it is a foot peg for the rider.
Foot peg for the rider. I like it. I'm moving on, Spurge.
Do it.
Doing a draw. This question comes in from Zach. I like him already.
You?
No, ZCH this time. So I know it's not me. The terminology in question is Farkles. I repeat, Farkles. Zach wants to know, what's a Farkle anyway? That's Farkles. Farkles.
I feel like this is something that I've heard Patrick Garvin say on the podcast already. I'm going to farkle up my Harley, or I'm going to farkle up my motorcycle. Yes. Typically, these are just accessories that aren't overly necessary. So, it's maybe some bling, maybe it's some chromed mirrors, or it's
they do something, but
yeah.
I think that's fair. The etymology here, Spurge, I believe I do know this one. Functional sparkles.
Functional sparkles.
Functional sparkles that you would put on your...
It sparkles up your motorcycle a little bit, but with function. So
could be panniers, could be rear sets.
I think of it more as I want the mirrors that are on my bike are black plastic, and I want anodized aluminum mirrors that look really cool and stealth, or
little bullet blinkers or something like that.
Yeah. It doesn't it's still a functional object, but you're changing the style to work within the function.
Sure. Yeah, I think that the ultimate Farkle in my mind is comes from an adventure bike world, adventure touring world. It would be fog lights, yes. Do you is it necessary to have those huge fog lights on your crash bar? No, but does it help? Probably. Yeah. And it's sort of the ultimate functional sparkle. That's my take on it.
There are going to be so many angry adventure riders that are it adds 37,000 lumens to my motorcycle, and I can see all the deer in the woods now. So we're sorry if we've offended you by saying that your fog lights are just Farkles. You, sir, are doing the long distance night riding, and you need those.
The thing that I think is the most fun,
sir or madam,
the thing that I think is the most fun about the term Farkle is that it can be sort of derogatory or positive. Someone can be I got my BMW GS all farkled up, and someone else would be like, nice, I like that. Or someone could be like, oh, you got bike's all covered in Farkles. It's stupid. I like that it's versatile,
Yeah, you can use it however you see fit. However you see fit. However you decide to Farkle, we support you. All right, I think my helmet's empty after this one, Mr. Quartz.
Oh, really? I only have one. I have one more too. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Bill gave us 2.
Oh.
And this goes back to, this was also one of Samantha's questions in the beginning.
Okay.
What are Clip-Ons versus Slip-Ons?
When am I clipping on
versus when am I slipping on?
Clip-on and slip-on. Okay.
2 completely different things, but I understand Bill's confusion.
Right. Bill's sort of do I want a clip-on or a slip-on? I could do either one. It's like a tie, right? They clip-on tie, or you could do a slip-on tie, which is where you tie it before and then you just you slip it over your head, and then
you never untie it. God help you if somebody unties that, because you'll never get it tied again. So let's do clip-ons first.
Clip-ons first. Clip-ons are the sort of handlebar equivalent of rear sets, if you will. Clip-ons are handlebars. And they specifically have a bracket that clips on to the top of the fork. So there's a piece that grabs the top of the fork, and then a bar runs from that little clip out, just a straight handlebar runs out, and that's your handlebar. It clips on to the fork, as opposed to a handlebar, which is a single piece handlebar, like you might see on a typical bicycle or something like that attaches to the top of the fork assembly, and you have a single handlebar, as opposed to clip-ons, which are clip on to the fork. And clip-ons, like rear sets, are often associated with sport riding. It makes the motorcycle more aggressive. It also offers more adjustability.
Yep. So if you're looking at a sport bike, chances are that is a clip-on style handlebar. Yep. It puts the rider further down in a much more aggressive position. You can have people say, oh, well, I'm changing, I'm adding clip-ons to the bike. You can remove a handlebar. When we're looking at like naked sport bikes, I've seen people take those in the other direction where they've gotten rid of the handlebar, added clip-ons. Or if you have a sport bike and you're doing what Zack does quite often, which is going to the track, you might get a more aggressive clip-on. You might get a bar that you can lower down, that you can change the pitch. So there's different types of clip-ons that you can get there. But that is a handlebar. Great definition, Zack.
Mm-hmm. Now,
how about a slip-on?
Slip-on. Now, is that just you slip on a handlebar, just like a slip-on handlebar?
That's probably what it is, right? Other direction entirely. This is the rear end of your motorcycle. Ooh. And we are talking about slip-on exhaust. This is typically the muffler will slip off and you will slip on a new muffler. It's called a slip-on because you're not actually removing the header pipes, which are the exhaust pipe coming out of the engine. You are only slipping on a new tail section, which would be what actually dumbs down the sound.
Historically, that is true. I'd like to add a caveat.
You're talking about catalytic converters? Is that we're getting
nowadays motorcycles, oftentimes the muffler really doesn't do very much. That's why modern mufflers on modern motorcycles are often like pretty light and pretty small in general, because often that big bread box underneath the motorcycle's engine, the one I was talking about with the center stands, that's where all the sort of, or much of the sound deadening happens, because that's where a lot of the, they have different, piping and chambers under there to control emissions and sound and blah, blah, blah. So historically, it was a big deal to put a slip-on your motorcycle, because you had an exhaust system that came from the engine around the engine in some way, usually around the bottom of the engine and then out the back of the bike. And if you took off the muffler and put on a different muffler, well, now you changed everything, because you took off this big heavy thing that had a bunch of, it had catalytic converter in it sometimes, or it just had a lot of muffling. And if you took that off, you were freeing up the air to flow out of the engine more quickly, and therefore raising the performance of your motorcycle. But anymore, that's kind of like muddy. Right.
You were raising
the decibel level. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think slip-ons are still a very popular ad, but, or a popular modification, but I don't think they necessarily do exactly the same thing as they used to from an extreme standpoint.
I would agree. I remember
a slip-on on an old bike, like this, the Norman Hyde slip-ons on my Bonneville completely changed the sound versus a Akrapovic slip-on on my KTM 890.
Yeah.
Doesn't do the same thing. Very little.
Yeah, exactly. I remember I worked at Motorcyclist Magazine back in 2013, I think. Yeah, 2012, 13. My colleague at the time, Mr. Aaron Frank, he got a long-term BMW R1200 GS, the all-new water-cooled GS for 2013. And he experimented with different slip-on exhausts to go on the bike. And what he learned was actually the stock exhaust made more horsepower in one case, and in another case was actually lighter than the slip-on. And we realized in that moment that the paradigm had really shifted. Motorcycle manufacturers weren't just dumping this huge, heavy, clunky muffler onto their motorcycles anymore. They were engineering them and making them out of good materials. And it was a different time. And it's only progressed since then.
I think a great example of that is the R6, right? And I know that there's other examples out there, but I know that we have a company R6 that we've done a lot of mods to, and exhaust testing on. But the stock exhaust on the R6, and I forget what year ours was, but it was a titanium exhaust.
Right.
It had a little exhaust valve in it that opened and closed to give you back pressure when you wanted it to maximize horsepower. So taking that off and changing it was oftentimes, aside from maybe getting a little bit louder, you were doing more detriment to the overall performance than you were good in some cases.
Yeah. And to be clear, if you're going to tune that motorcycle for track only performance and, maximum horsepower between 10 and 15,000 RPM, then you're going to gain something from having a full exhaust system on there. But in general, not so much. I had a long-term R1 for a year or so, and it was the same thing. I took the muffler completely off, did a dyno run. It sounded almost identical and made the same amount of horsepower with the muffler off. It didn't make any difference because it had all that complicated stuff underneath the engine. Anyway,
there you go. Zack, I think you have one more before we move on to the t-shirt winner for the day.
This comes
in. Oh no,
we have to do
RevTrivia. Oh,
we
so much more to do.
We got to listen to a bike.
We don't have to. We are excited to do.
Exactly. This question, the last one, comes in from Eli. This is going to be a quick one. Eli wants to know, what is a cage or cager? When someone says, "Oh, there's a cage over there," or that cager did something. What the heck do they mean?
This is a derogatory term aimed at people that drive cars.
The horror.
A cage is an automobile, and a cager is a person that drives a car. Because you're a motorcyclist. Yeah. You're not in a cage. Yeah. You're out there in the open road.
You're free.
You're breathing in the air clean, not through a windshield. The radio's not on. You might have a comm system, but not a radio.
That's right. We are occasionally cagers. We'll admit it.
I'm a cager today. It was raining out.
Yeah.
I caged my way down here in a Toyota Tacoma.
All right. Okay. Well, that sums up all of our terminology here. I had fun. I don't know if you did, but if you thought it was at least a little bit useful, you could send in some more terms. Maybe we will cover something like this sometime in the future.
You as in the audience, not you as in Spurgeon. He's not talking to me. He's talking to you folks out there.
I'm never talking to Spurge, to be clear. I'm always talking to you, the audience.
He's talking at me. Or through me, but never to me.
All right. Shall we listen to an engine and see if we can guess what it is?
I think this is, as oftentimes, the most favorite part of the podcast for a lot of people listening.
I love this part.
For those people that have never played the Highside, Lowside engine game before, Zack and I do not know the engine sound today. This is provided from producer Chase by you, the audience. If you have an engine sound for us to try and guess, you can send it into Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. Without any further ado, Zack and I are going to play the engine sound. Hopefully you are at home playing along with us today. And let's see if you can guess that engine sound.
Shout it out if you know it. Not you, Spurge, the audience.
Is that a bird in the beginning? You hear a bird? That was a maple warbler, yellow-bellied seasonal cockatoo. I don't know. I'm not a avid bird watcher, but I heard a bird in the beginning.
Yes, indeed. Okay.
How many cylinders?
I have no idea. One.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Super small displacement, bone stock, no exhaust. No muff,
no slip-on. That is no slip-on.
No slip-on has been added. This is the stock slip-on on this motorcycle.
It sounds like a little single cylinder engine. I think it's a single cylinder. I think it's small displacement. Should we go with it? Should we get a hint?
Like a Royal Enfield Meteor 350 or?
I think smaller. I'm going smaller even. Like I'm going like a Honda horizontal 125, like a Grom or a Cub or a Monkey or a, what do you think?
A Monkey. Well, with it, I mean, the Dax was just introduced for the American market.
So it was.
That cute, adorable little motorcycle from Honda, a Dax, built on the Honda Monkey Grom type chassis, but looking more like an old Trail 70. Let's do a hint and then we'll listen again because I got nowhere to start on this one. Oh, great. The first hint is single cylinder.
All right.
Producer Chase does it again. He has given us a hint that really points us in the right direction. He's like our guiding North Star, Producer Chase. Thank you for that hint. Let's go ahead and listen one more time. Try to ignore the birds chirping because that distracted me the first time. And focus on the engine sound, people. All right.
Fuel
pump.
Yes. There's a fuel pump. So it's a modern fuel injected bike, but it is a small single cylinder engine, I think. And I hear like a heavy flywheel. And what I mean by that is when they rev it up, it's slow to rev. And then it's when they shut the throttle, it's slow to, rather than like, vroom, vroom, it goes, vroom. Okay. I think it's a Honda Super Cub.
I still think it's a Royal Enfield. I think it's like a Royal Enfield 350.
Okay. I like
maybe,
it.
Yeah, maybe like a bigger, I don't know. I'm still thinking bigger, but
Royal Enfield's a pretty good guess.
First generation of 2 generations introduced in 1994. Asterisk, according to Wikipedia.
Okay, so this is the second hint for those.
First generation of 2 generations introduced in 1994. It takes your 125 Honda out the window.
Yeah, I suppose so. Although Honda's made 125.
The Super Cub was, but the Super Cub was like older than that. Like,
hang on, this is a first generation of 2 generations that started in 1994. So when do we think that first generation ended? Because fuel injection didn't really start becoming a thing until late 90s, really. Like I remember that was when the CBR 600 became fuel injected, and it was sort of like, and I feel like that was kind of the beginning of mainstream fuel injection in my mind. I don't know if that's true.
I don't think this model became fuel injected until later, based on its displacement size that I'm hearing. I think it's more beginner friendly. So I wouldn't focus too much on. And see, this is the beauty of the Highside, Lowside engine sound guessing game, people. It's like, what do you focus on versus what do you not care about?
Okay, hang on. Read the hint again. The second hint again.
First generation of 2 introduced in 1994.
Okay. So
the model was introduced in 94.
But this doesn't necessarily, the thing we heard isn't necessarily the first generation. Just the first generation was introduced in 1994 and there was a second generation.
I'm guessing we are hearing the second generation.
I think so too.
Of a bike that was originally introduced in 1994. That's how I'm taking this. So what single cylinder, tiny displacement motorcycle was introduced in 1994 when you were 11 years old? And I was 11 years old. I got there first. By
there are so many small things. Yeah, the Yamaha SR 400. No, that goes way back.
When's your birthday? Isn't your birthday today? Isn't your birthday around here?
No.
I feel like I missed your birthday. Did I miss your birthday?
You did, but that doesn't matter.
I know, but now I'm distracted.
It was a couple weeks ago. 10 days ago. Okay. We got to move on here.
Should we sing for you? Should we sing happy birthday?
Please don't sing. No. Okay. This is embarrassing enough, me not doing well in this engine sound guessing game. I don't know. I feel like it's a little air-cooled single, and I don't like, it was introduced in 1994. So I don't know where to go with that.
Honda, what about like the CB250? When was that introduced?
CBR 250, CB 250, CB. It could be it doesn't sound like a liquid cooled 300, but I guess it could be.
But it could be like the old 250. It was like a 250 originally. When did that 250 come out?
I give up. I don't know. I've said all the things that I think it is. I don't know what it is. What is it?
You gotta be shitting me, producer Chase.
Is it a Honda Dax?
It's a Suzuki TU250X from 2011.
Hey-o!
This was a bike that we talked extensively about on the podcast for the engine sound guessing game. I completely forgot that there were 2 generations of this. I favored this pick for the young lady in Southern California that wanted to only spend $1,500 on a motorcycle. And I said to you 250X, Zach said, I don't think you can get that in California because emissions. It was a 49 state bike. Anyway, Nick sent us in an audio clip of a 2011 Suzuki TU250X. Nick works as a range aide at his local MSF course. Thought the bike would be fun to send in for one of the more common MSF bikes. The bike has been dropped, crashed, flipped, high-sided, and low-sided.
I love to hear it.
Just straight up abused, and it still runs great.
Okay. Well, I think this is interesting because you thought it was maybe a Royal Enfield 350 and I thought it was maybe a Honda 125 and it was a 250. It was an air-cooled 250 right in the middle there.
Yeah. But I think it speaks volumes to the fact that we got the engine type, an air-cooled.
We did okay. We did okay.
We did not do great.
Producer Chase slid one by us yet again.
That damn bird sound in the beginning, that just distracted me.
He's cagey.
The Western Warbler.
All right. Well, you know what I think will make us feel better after getting our shins kicked in that Engine Sound Guessing Game Spurg?
Giving away a t-shirt.
Exactly.
Makes me feel warm and fuzzy.
Yes,
and depending on when you're listening to this, we might have new t-shirts.
Ooh.
Or we'll just have the old ones. The old ones aren't going away anytime
We're going to give those away until we're out of them. Okay. Just a friendly reminder, the way you can win a t-shirt is to leave a review on the Apple Podcast platform. We know that it's the day and age changes with every minute and every podcast uploaded, and now there are comments that are allowed on Spotify, I think now. So we're gonna keep we're gonna try to evolve with the times, everybody, just so you know. But for now, the call to action is leave a review on the Apple Podcast platform. That helps with distribution of our show. And if you leave something that's either very flattering or very funny, or sometimes even a little bit plucky yet heartstringy, we will read it and send you a t-shirt. Spurg, who's the winner?
Is the winner, I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. Is the winner, they put their name as free Highside, Lowside, HSLS shirt recipient. Is that correct? All right. So
that's
they
accurate.
chose for their name to be called free HSLS Highside, Lowside shirt recipient on Apple Podcasts. So
nice.
This winner says, I was riding the other day and ended up riding with a dude named Zack who wouldn't stop doing wheelies on a KTM Supermoto. Sounds just like my co-host. Goes on to say, I'll move from pretty sure to certain that we live in a simulation when I meet a dude named Spurgeon, crusher of jumps, who rides a KTM 890 rally. So he's trying to figure out, or she's trying to figure out exactly.
Is this the Matrix? Exactly.
Yeah. Where are we? And they said, please get Keanu Reeves as a guest on the show.
Speaking
to
of the
discuss
Matrix.
This further.
Right. I think that talking about whether or not we're living in a simulation and talking about motorcycles would be fun to do with Keanu Reeves. We agree. Free Highside, Lowside shirt recipient. Keanu, can I call you Keanu? I know you listen to every episode. We know you're a motorcycling fan. Just come on the podcast. We won't bite. We're not going to ask.
You can pick the topic, Keanu.
Exactly.
We'll sit back and we'll let you pick the topic, and Zach and I will just be along for the ride. Your world, we're living in it.
Exactly. Yeah. We're not going to ask who's the best kisser in Hollywood. If you want to tell us, that's fine. But we just want to talk about motorcycles and and doing wheelies and crushing jumps and whether or not we're living in a simulation. Those are suggested topics, but like Spurg said, you pick and we'll do whatever.
So hopefully, free Highside, Lowside shirt recipient Keanu will join us as a guest on the show. We would love that. But we're not going to hold your t-shirt hostage. Zach and I originally toyed around with the idea of we'll give you a t-shirt once Keanu joins. That puts a lot of pressure on Keanu. We don't want to do that.
It does. We're not going to do that. So free Highside, Lowside shirt recipient. Thank you for your comment. We're not sure if we're living in a simulation either, but we do know one thing for sure, which is that if you send your mailing address and your preferred t-shirt size to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com, we'll send you some swag.
So the Highside, Lowside comment of the day comes in via email from Jonathan and says, one question that often comes to my mind as I watch CTXP videos, it's the Common Tread Experience videos, such as your adventure in India last year, is how does it feel to wear an open face helmet during these long excursions? I know you wear them so that the audience can more fully experience your beautiful faces during shooting, but how much do you wear an open face helmet when you aren't in front of a camera? Does it require any special preparations like chapstick or sunscreen? Is it more tiring to ride all day with your face in the wind? And do you choose when you wear them, or does Spencer just demand it for certain videos? Spencer is our producer for the CTXP shoots. Zach, where do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, a bunch of questions here. Chapstick, sunscreen, long excursions, cameras. I don't know. I think the bottom line here, Jonathan, is that Yeah, we mostly do it because it makes for a better video experience, and you get to sort of like live with us as we ride along and see our expressions and that kind of thing. And I don't ride very often with an open face helmet when I'm not in front of a camera. I do occasionally. Sometimes I pop around the neighborhood. I go to the store to get something and it's only whatever, a couple miles away on surface streets through neighborhoods, and I'll wear an open face helmet. I kind of like it. Sometimes it's freeing, and oftentimes in urban and suburban environments, I find my peripheral vision is enhanced with an open faced helmet, which is a risk I'm willing to accept, having my jaw out in the open. But in general, I'm a full face helmet person, and the reason we do it for CTXP is just for the camera.
So just to answer a couple of your specific questions,
yeah,
how did Zack and I enjoy it in India? It was horrible. There was a period when we first started shooting where we were riding, we had left the Triumph factory and we had just had on sunglasses, and the grit and sand and dirt in the air was brutal.
Staggering.
And we pulled over, within like the first hour and put on the goggles because we're like, we can't, this is horrible.
And then even the rest of that trip from Delhi to Chandigarh, we kept saying like, man, I just feel like I can feel grit on my teeth and on my gums and like in my mouth. Like
chewing.
There's dirt in your mouth. It was gross. And then when we got to Chandigarh, it pelted down rain, which at 50 or 60 miles an hour hurts when it hits you in the face.
And then it's getting in your mouth and you're like, how dirty is this rain based on the amount of dirt that was on my face washing into my mouth? So it was definitely for filming. And there were times where Zack and I were both like, I wish that we had a full face helmet on this trip. Definitely chapstick and sunscreen becomes much more important. Like we were both sharing a tube of chapstick sunscreen. Zack and I used our own chapstick on that trip, but we were sharing.
We did.
We
could afford that, believe it or not.
Is it more tiring to ride all day with your face in the wind?
Yeah,
100%.
I think so.
Where's you
definitely?
Out?
Yeah. It's like full face helmets are great.
Yeah.
We occasionally, depending on the CTXP episode, have worn modular helmets, which are full face helmets with their chin bar flips up. And they're heavy and complex and sometimes can be expensive, but that is a great piece of kit for touring if that's something you're interested in. I've found that they're quite nice on long trips because you can, when you are riding around town at low speed or something like that, or you walk into a convenience store to buy a half gallon of water or whatever, you can flip your chin bar up and the cashier can see your face and you can have a conversation. You get back out on the road, you slap it down, and you're protected from bugs and dirt and of course your face is protected should the worst occur.
All right. Well, hopefully, Jonathan, that helps answer your question. What I will tell you is at the time this airs, Zack, Ari, and myself will be out filming a very special CTXP episode that will not be airing until early in 2025. But that's all I'm going to say. It's going to be definitely one that you're not going to want to miss. If you've not watched CTXP episodes in the past, you want to head over to RevZilla's YouTube channel and start at the beginning and work your way through. Zack and Ari are your two primary hosts, and every now and then different hosts get thrown in ancillarily from time to time. But there are all kinds of adventures from Alaska to India to finding every dirt road in Wyoming and not hitting a piece of pavement to mini bikes and everything in between. So check that over on the RevZilla YouTube channel.
Or if you're already on the RevZilla YouTube channel watching this,
stay there.
Great news. Just stay here and just do more of this.
Because we're done. This episode is over.
Yeah.
We have some housekeeping stuff. We're going to tell you to leave a comment on YouTube if that's where you're consuming this. We're going to tell you to send your emails or your Highside, Lowside, engine sound, guessing game samples over to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. Please remember to share the podcast with your friends. We are always looking to make sure that we are trying to distribute the podcast to the best of our abilities. And whether you are helping new riders get into sport or you're just passing along content from one rider to the next, the easiest way for motorcyclists to help other motorcyclists out there is to just be inclusive. And that's sharing the podcast if you enjoy it, or if you're out there and you're trying to find a new friend in motorcycling. You know, maybe it's you're helping somebody get into motorcycling themselves. You talk about terms, you show them how to get to an MSF course, you show them Lance's article, and you're bringing new motorcyclists into it. And then 10 years from now, there's more motorcyclists on the road, and we're all happier for it.
That's right. And when they say, what's the difference between a clip-on and a slip-on? Now you know.
Send them this episode. I think that's a great little wrap up, Zach, as far as, you know, things we learned today.
Yeah.
There's no dumb questions. Some of these were really good questions.
Right. Only dumb hosts.
Only dumb hosts. And I think we proved
dumb
that.
questions.
We proved that.
I think we proved that too. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you got a kick out of it. Even if you knew all those terms already. Yeah. And I think that is something that we would like to reiterate, or I would like to reiterate after Spurg said it just now, which is that, inclusion is the name of the game here at Highside, Lowside. And we hope that you will invite more motorcyclists into the fold, whether it's with this episode or your own, dumb answers to smart questions.
You know what I didn't realize, Zach? I didn't realize how many, motorcycle terms come from horsing.
That's actually a good point. That's a very good point. It makes sense though. You know, Iron horse. After all,
horsepower.
The
steel steed.
Okay. Let's cut it off.
We could do this all day long. That's an entirely other podcast. We should probably stop now. Let's wrap it up. For all of you out there that have endured another episode of Highside, Lowside with Zach and I, thank you so much for making this the successful podcast that it is. If you do have suggestions for future episodes, things you want to see, things you want to hear Zach and I stop talking about, you can always send an email to highsidelowside at RevZilla.com. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts to you guys and gals out there. Until next time, we'll see you later.